the consulting coordinator of Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Water Network. We also have Sarah Didrikson in the background. Sarah's kind of running things and making sure this webinar goes smoothly. Sarah's with CCA also. And today we are going to be talking about something that the USDA NRCS calls a water management entity. A water management entity is a relatively new entity category that is eligible for funding through the NRCS Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And probably most of the people on this call are familiar with this Environmental Quality Incentive Program and the acronym that we throw around all the time, EQIP. But if you're not, the EQIP program provides funding for implementing ag conservation practices. So this thing called a water management entity represents a way to get ditch-wide irrigation infrastructure improvement projects funded and implemented without each shareholder having to individually apply for and manage an EQIP contract. So it serves as an umbrella entity that can apply for and manage a project on behalf of its shareholders. So we are joined by Liz With, Kendra Bradner, and Stacy Eskew of USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Greg Peterson with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. Liz is the Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships, and Stacy and Kendra are EQIP program managers. And Liz will be presenting, and Stacy and Kendra will be here to answer specific programmatic questions. Greg Peterson with CAWA has been working to help entities better understand and utilize this water management entity for getting irrigation infrastructure projects funded. So he's going to talk a bit about just a couple of generic examples. We are going to run this webinar a bit differently than usual. Normally we wait till the end and then we have questions, but because this topic is a bit technical, I think it makes more sense for us to just go ahead and ask our questions. So if you have a question anytime during the presentation, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it, or you can put it in the chat if you'd rather. Either way, we want this to be interactive, more like a discussion. So today's webinar, by the way, is being recorded, and we will be posting that on our website at agwaternetwork.org, along with highlights of the webinar as well. And we'll also post the slide deck that Liz is going to be showing. So Liz, if you are ready, we'll go ahead and throw your first slide up on the screen. And Sarah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Phil. So I'm just going to leave my camera on for a hot second, and just to preserve bandwidth and make sure that we don't glitch or have any other issues, I'm going to shut my camera off. But I did want to say hi to everybody and welcome. It's nice to put face to a name. So if you ever need anything, like Phil said, I'm Liz With, the Assistant State Conservationist for partnerships here in the state with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Okay. And I am so excited this morning to be here with you today that I can't help but share a quick story. So I was walking through a hayfield the other day before it snowed, and I heard some of the alfalfa screaming. And so when I stopped and I started to listen, I heard the plants saying to the sprinkler, "Stop spraying water everywhere. You're really starting to irrigate me." Okay, anyway. But so I do just want to take a real hot minute to introduce you to Kendra and Stacy. These ladies are the masterminds that run financial assistance programs, especially the EQIP program for NRCS. They are the ladies that read the rules, meet with national, interpret the rules, develop the guidance. Everything to breathe through our financial assistance programs usually passes through their desk and the whole programs team desk. We do have a couple other programs folks on here. But so Kendra, would you take a minute and just introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kendra Brantner. As Liz said, I am one of the EQIP program managers for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and I am based out of the Ray field office in northeastern Colorado. So again, excited for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kendra. And Stacy?
Good morning, I'm Stacy Eskew. I'm the other EQIP program manager for NRCS here in Colorado, and I am stationed out of the center field office in the San Luis Valley.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy.
Mhm.
So Bill set us up with a really good intro here. Just for big picture, for those of you who don't know who NRCS is, we are the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we're here to help our ag land and forest land landowners address their natural resource concerns on private lands for resource conservation, food security, and so much more, okay? We are an agency that is responsible for implementing Farm Bill programs and providing both financial assistance, so the dollars to implement the project, as well as technical assistance, engineering, conservation planning, forestry, inventories, you name it. We have specialized staff on board to help with this. Okay, when our agency was first founded, we did have a higher focus on soil resources and soil conservation back in the 30s with the Dust Bowl days. However, our purview was quickly expanded. We now cover everything from soil, water, air, plants, animal energy, even human potential resource concerns. And so we're talking about water management entities today, a very, very small opportunity, and I just mean in the purview of the whole Farm Bill scale, a small opportunity that is part of the Environmental Quality Incentives Program that is developed and administered through the Farm Bill. So we're like 3 tiers down on where this program sits. And so real quick, next slide, please, Sarah. Pardon me, Sarah. We're here to talk about this very specific opportunity, and I was just hoping real quick so I could help tailor my speech a little bit more. If folks in the room could raise your hand if you've heard of EQIP. Is there a raise your hand tool in Zoom, Phil? I should have asked earlier. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, a lot of familiar names. Morning, Paul. Morning, Raquel. Okay, so we've got folks that have heard. I even see some of our NRCS folks are here joining us on the call today. It's great to have you. You guys can put your hands down. For those folks, it looks like we've got a lot of people that may not even have environmental quality incentives program background. So this is going to be a very detailed call. Again, my expectation is that you guys stop me, okay? Kendra and Stacy have their eyes on the chat. They're going to call out when questions pop up, but if you've also got a question you'd prefer to just raise your hand, please, please, please do so. Let's put this as a useful conversation for us to have, okay? So historically, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program funding opportunities has been specific funding for individual producers to implement projects on their land, right? Their agricultural conservation projects on land they either own or lease. However, in the 2018 Farm Bill, there was a new provision that allowed for public or semi-public irrigation companies that provide water to ag producers to also become a potentially eligible participant in the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, okay? And so when we're talking here today, I'm going to be using 2 kind of different terms that I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with. First and foremost, I'm going to use the term on-farm. And when we talk about on-farm conservation projects, we're directly talking about projects that include usually infield structures, irrigation, water management, things that individual producer is doing for his or her operation on their own private land, right? Where kind of the buck stops with the ag production. When I use the term off-farm, we are typically talking about delivery systems, okay? So like the way to get the water from the river across the subdivision to the ag producer that's a couple miles away, or maybe that in-stream diversion to get water into the ditch that services many different producers along the pipeline, okay? So Next slide, please, Sarah. Let's go ahead and define what water management entities are, okay? And they're those projects that focus on these off-farm delivery systems. And Sarah, next slide, please. Uh-oh, I think that there may be a lag, or at least on my end.
No, we're not seeing it either.
Okay.
Just what we may want to do is have you go ahead and bring up your slide and share your screen. Are you able
Okay.
to go ahead and share your screen, Liz?
Sure. Yep. Give me just a hot second. I can do that. Yep. Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm all ready to go if we need to switch to that though.
Okay.
Okay. So just to talk through what the definition of a water management entity is. So these groups, this very special type of environmental quality incentive application need to be a public or semi-public agency or organization with the purpose of assisting individual ag producers regarding their irrigation water delivery or management. Very simple concept, right? Like if you have a ditch company that helps to provide your water, if it's public or semi-public and it's servicing a public interest for irrigation water to ag producers, you may be able to potentially qualify. Now, today we're going to speak to and talk through exactly what that might look like. Okay. So like we lined out in the last slide, it needs to be, you have to meet all of these to potentially qualify. Okay. So we're talking about entities that are public or semi-public that are assisting private land ag producers regarding irrigation water distribution, and that the project is specifically for water conservation, wildlife habitat, or to facilitate kind of like a drought-related mitigation project so that that water is available in those drought times. Okay. So next slide, please, Sarah. So there's a second component. Not only does the entity have to potentially be eligible for these projects, the land in which it's being implemented also has to be eligible for these projects. And there's a lot of information on these slides. Bill gave me a hard time yesterday that they weren't the prettiest and there's lots of words. This is really for a reference for you guys. These are quotations directly from our policy so that you've got them because it is very complex. But where I'm going to go through and point out the most important things for water management entities. Okay, so on this slide, land eligibility can be different for water management entities, right? In typical and every other environmental quality incentives program application, that land has to be some sort of ag land. In this case, for water management entities, it is a potential that we are dealing with non-agricultural land. So as we kind of talked through that off-farm delivery system, maybe it comes out and goes through a residential subdivision that wouldn't typically be eligible for NRCS programs. It may potentially be eligible if all of the entity eligibility requirements are met, if it's providing for that public service to ag landowners. Okay, so next slide, please. Sarah, I've got it will be a diagram up here on the screen. So we're going to just talk through the flow chart real quick. So you'll see that there are two big classes, two big parts of this flow chart, and we're going to focus in on each of them.
Oh, Liz, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I think we got a question and I don't want to leave them hanging. Raquel?
So let me I will wait for this slide because I think you might answer my question. I'll put my hand down and then I might put it back up again. Thank you.
Absolutely, Raquel, you are more than welcome, and thanks for catching me, Greg. I appreciate it. Okay, so there's two big parts to this eligibility bit, right? There's we've been discussing the actual entity eligibility, and then there's a second bit on the land eligibility. And so let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and we're just going to talk through the left-hand side, the actual entity eligibility. And there's three main questions that we need to ask, right? So first of all, is that entity an appropriate business type? And is it serving a public purpose? And are we distributing that water to ag producers? Okay, if we can't answer yes to all three of those questions, it is not going to be an eligible project, and we shouldn't even start down this path. Okay, so looking at the very center of this flow chart, there's the triangle right there that has a list of business types. These business types are, when you're working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, we have all of our eligibility records are actually established with the Farm Service Agency, so a sister agency within the USDA family. Okay, so they are responsible for managing every individual producer, every entity's eligibility records across all USDA programs. And they've created this long table of different business types that could potentially qualify for programs. Okay, so when the water management entity application process was discussed, it has been defined as those business types that are either joint ventures, corporations, state or local governments, nonprofit organizations, or limited liability corporations. Okay, and so when you start the application process, one of the very first things that you would need to do is to go into your Farm Service Agency office, and you would bring, and we can maybe, Phil, I should have thought about this a little bit beforehand, what records to potentially bring with you, but they'll want to look at your incorporation papers, your tax information, that type of thing to help understand which business class that they put you into. And it really is their final decision on what business type they classify you as.
Liz,
Okay.
I just have a couple questions on this real quickly.
Yes, please. Yep.
What business type do you run across most often in ditch companies or any entity when people apply for this program?
So frequently, we have been seeing either a nonprofit organization that does require some extra documents to be able to classify as that. There's some benefits to that, and we're going to look at that in just a little bit. But we also see a lot of limited liability corporations are also the ones that are getting through the process.
Great. And what if, and this happened recently, with a project I'm working on, we went into the FSA office and we mentioned water management entity, and they looked at us like a deer in the headlights. What if that local employee at FSA is completely unfamiliar with the WME process? What do we do? Who do we get in touch with?
A great question. So if you guys are struggling with getting FSA records established, let your field office know, and you can also go ahead and reach out to me, and we'll just make sure. We've been working with the Farm Service Agency state office. We work with them very closely on a lot of different things, including making sure that records are being established correctly. So if you're having trouble, if they're not able to make that designation on what your business type is, or if there's concerns that are being raised, please let your local field office know and CC me, and we can see what we can do to work directly with the Farm Service Agency state office.
Awesome, thank you. And then, yeah, just on the document side of this, don't want to divert too long, but I mean, Colorado Secretary of State website, that business search. I mean, if you've been if your entity, your ditch company, your district has been up to date in there, you can find your state standings, articles of incorporation, bylaws. For the nonprofit, it's a bit more, and that's something that if myself, I can help you out with that and talk about it another time.
That's perfect, Greg. That's awesome. And if you guys, you do have questions, yeah, reach out to Greg on helping to understand what business types those might be too. So that would be ideal. Okay. So Sarah, we're gonna go to the next slide. This slide jumps a little bit into a wormhole, talking about adjusted gross income. So to participate in the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, there was an established threshold for adjusted gross income, meaning that producers on average for the last 3 years, as reported to IRS, shouldn't be making more than 900,000, right? And that's a form that we collect to establish part of that eligibility information with the Farm Service Agency, okay? The corporations, nonprofit organizations, and limited liability corporations are all required to file those forms, okay? The only business type that's a water management entity that does not have to file that form is a state or a local government, okay? In some very limited and discrete circumstances, we can seek adjusted gross income waivers, meaning that if you're an entity that would otherwise qualify with a project that would otherwise qualify for one of these water management entity projects, we may be able to seek an adjusted gross income waiver from national headquarters, but you may still have to you will not be, if the waiver is approved, you will not have to submit the paperwork, okay? But we do have to go through that waiver process if your entity is making more than $900,000 on average for the last 3 fiscal years of reported IRS adjusted gross income, okay?
So
And
Liz,
those-
just to clarify,
Yep.
you know, we're talking about water management entities, not individuals. So
Correct.
for a corporation, a limited liability company, if they showed in excess of $900,000 of adjusted gross income over, I guess, an average of 3 years preceding their application, then they would need to seek a waiver from NRCS to be able to be
Correct.
qualified. Okay.
Correct. And so, Phil, that's a great leading question. Sarah, can you please go to the next slide? So along with the information that Phil's going to be sending out, I have a couple of other, we're going to skip this one. Sorry, one more. A couple of forms and documents to help you guys navigate this water management entity process and kind of have your ducks in a row as you move forward and you start brain thinking these projects. So one of the things that Phil is going to be sending out is the eligibility matrix, and it comes in an Excel spreadsheet. It covers all previous Farm Bill, different project types. So it's a little bit much to throw on the scene. I know it's really ugly up here actually on the screen, but first and foremost, there's a couple things going on. So all of the highlighted blue lines, those are the business types that we've talked about being eligible for water management entities. So those are the ones that we're focusing on, okay? Now, when we start to look at the columns, there's the group of yellow columns, and that is the entity that's applied, kind of that big umbrella that's actually putting in the application to participate in the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, okay? Now, in some cases, NRCS does request information not only on the entity, but individual members within that entity. Okay, so there's boons to each one of these business types, just like we talked about that local or state government entities never have to submit adjusted gross income. When you look at the nonprofit organizations, the actual entity has to submit farm and track eligibility, adjusted gross income eligibility, and we'll come to the payment limits later. That's not applicable in water. We'll talk about that later. I don't want to get off topic. Okay. But if you're a nonprofit, you'll follow it over to the individual entity columns, the individual member columns. Sorry, the green columns are the members within that entity. And you'll see that nonprofits don't have to collect this information from every single one of either the board of the nonprofit or whoever's governing that nonprofit, okay? But you'll still see that if you are to submit an application for a limited liability company, not only would that limited liability company, the entity, need to provide all of their records, but also every single entity member within that organization would also then have to provide adjusted gross income information. Okay, so this is where we start talking about these larger ditch companies servicing a lot of people. Depending on how that ditch company was set up, drastically affects the records that are going to have to be provided to be able to qualify for these programs.
So can you do you have any examples you could provide there, Liz? I mean, that's a really important point. And so the structure, for example, if it's a nonprofit and is structured as that through registered through the Secretary of State as a nonprofit, then that individual, all the individuals shareholders on the ditch are not going to have to are not going to be required to provide an adjusted gross income statement to the NRCS. But if they're structured as a partnership, as a corporation, as a joint venture, then every single person, every single shareholder that would be involved would need to provide that information to NRCS.
Correct.
Well, Liz, to add on to that, what if I have a ditch company that's a limited liability company and I get 90% of the shareholders' information? Are we out of luck, or what does that mean?
Stacy and Kendra, I'm going to let you ladies answer that one.
Okay, so if you had 90% of the shareholders had turned in their AGI and everything, and they were eligible, then the overall contract amount would be reduced by whatever share percent that individual or individuals hold within the entity.
Okay, so just to make sure that if I couldn't get 10% of the shares, then that only means, okay, the amount that we're able to ask for goes down by 10%.
Yes.
Right, and I think Raquel, you have a question?
Yes, now I do. So with this, requirement of getting the AGI from all the land owners, if the project is an improvement to the water delivery system, let's say it includes piping, and that's that. Is that still required, or is it seen like if the whole project is limited to land owned by the entity? Do you need that?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Donnie, it looks like you've got your hand up, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Does it matter if the ditch company is partially or majority owned by a municipality? So I work at a place where I actually work for a municipality, and we own a lot of shares in various companies that continue to do provide to agricultural entities, but we've bought it for municipal water use. But yeah, does that matter?
It does. So I would encourage you to set up a conversation with your farm service agency, right? And taking the records that you potentially have. I'm going to go back to, it's so important. We're spending so much time on the definition this morning for a reason, right? Because this is kind of the big caveat to how you potentially qualify for the program. So if you qualify for one of the eligible business types, and you are serving a public purpose, and it is a water conservation project, and delivery is for irrigation for agricultural producers, right? Like
Right.
the project has to be geared towards that. So if you were doing an offset of another pipeline, one for your ag producers, and then maybe a second pipeline to for the municipal services that you provide, the municipal side of that project is not going to qualify for funding here. We
And
only do projects for conservation for ag producers or forest landowners.
so does that include, typically the municipality for treated water needs takes it out of the ditch. However, the same city municipality has parks and golf courses and those kind of things, maybe a community garden. Are those considered parks, golf courses, those things not considered ag either, right?
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
it goes back, you can work with your FSA and see if they're willing to establish eligibility records, but in general, no, like it needs to be
Okay.
tied back to an ag producer with an ag product going
Got you.
out.
Okay, thank you.
Sean, I
Sean.
think, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
We gotcha.
So I have one question and then a second question that builds on what Donnie's asking. So I'll start with the Donnie question. If in the event, just using made up numbers, a municipality might own 60% of a mutual ditch and the other 40% is quote unquote ag and would pass any giggle test with FSA, would there be an ability to sort of prorate the ask of saying, okay, if you're going to ask for X dollars, will we, the NRCS, would fund that up to 40% because that's the percentage that's being used for agriculture?
I guess, and Kendra, Stacy, help me brain think this through, but Sean, who would the applicant be? Are they the
ditch
public
company.
Okay, so they are a semi-public or public entity that is responsible and has jurisdiction for providing irrigation water delivery to agricultural producers?
Well, I don't want to parse words too much, but it actually builds into my first question. Let's say it's a corporation that for this discussion we're going to call a mutual ditch company, and because they're a corporation, you have to kind of look at how the water's used and who the makeup of the shareholders are. And again, just making numbers up, let's say the city of Fort Collins is a 60% shareholder in that company. That leaves 40% that are individuals that would pass all the yes, no decision matrix charts. Could $100,000 ask be prorated down to $40,000 because that's the makeup of everyone who passes those criteria? And if that's too nuanced or complicated, I could go on to my first question.
Okay, so I guess maybe you guys, you hear the hesitancy in our responses, and that's because these are such complicated type projects and depends on every single like fact pattern associated with each project. So I want to be as fully transparent and disclose as much as possible, but I also don't want to shut something down or say that something will work 100% of the time when I don't 100% know. So I guess maybe the big part of this is if you guys do want to consider this, you've got Kendra's and Stacy's information is coming up at the end of the slideshow. And maybe it would be best, let's talk about particular projects with specific circumstances. Let's get a meeting set up and look at some maps and throw together what those entities are actually made up of and make sure that we can talk with our FSA brethren to get it vetted through the system on what corporation type it's going to be and what records would be needed and how we can even start mashing this together. We're more than happy to meet with people on a one-on-one basis to kind of triage some of these projects.
Okay. So my first primary question is a little in the weeds. I'm looking at the table. I'm hearing the language and the words that are being used, and I want to laser in on something, and those on Zoom might be able to chime in and correct me if I've got it wrong, but in most cases that I'm familiar with ditch companies, they're kind of both on this chart. They are both a corporation and a nonprofit. And the corporation side, Greg already mentioned, hey, you could look online, see they're incorporated. That's all fine and great. They've got bylaws and articles of incorporation, etc. They also are most cases they can be a 501c12, not a 501c3, which I would imagine most people are familiar with 501c3s and call them quote unquote a nonprofit. Do you know if in the FSA sort of criteria or world, do they broaden that definition of a nonprofit to be sort of all 501cs? And if so, do they look at something and say, hey, if we had our druthers, you could either be a 501c12 or a corporation. We're going to default to corporation because that's just more inclusive and covers everybody's backside, and we'll get all the documents.
In general, you're going to need to talk with FSA about eligibility records. I do have their definition of each business type. Phil's got it as a handout for after the meeting concludes, that spells out exactly what's needed and what they're looking for, like tax ID number wise, to help understand. I do want to say, and please do not quote me on this, it's just a general gut feeling through a project that we worked through in the past. I think they're looking for a 501c3. I think they do use a narrower definition. But that being said, if you're looking at a different type, you feel like you should be considered a nonprofit, take those records in and talk to your FSA office about why you think you qualify as that. Right? And ask for that designation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Raquel, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you. And thank you, Liz, for the presentation. I don't think I thanked you before. I have two clarifications, and I think I maybe am missing something, but I thought your previous slide had said that the exemption for the AGI was for corporation, some nonprofits like churches, and some other listed, and then for limited liability company. But on this table, it seems like it's different. And I don't know if I'm missing something, but.
Yeah, Sarah, if you want to go back 2 slides, it's actually those entities. So the corporation, nonprofits, and limited liability corporations are required to file AGI, and they are not AGI exempt. Only the state agency governmental folks are exempt.
That's very helpful. Thanks.
Yep.
And then the other question I had is the 900,000 average AGI that you had mentioned before. I was understanding that that was for the entity. Is that for combined AGI of all landowners, or both, or what am I missing?
For sure. Great question. Okay, so Sarah, if you can jump forward 2 slides back to the ugly eligibility records table. You'll see here, so not only does that AGI requirement hit for the entity itself, but that AGI requirement is also true and needs to be filed for entity members within that. So if you've got an entity that makes less than 900,000 and they're eligible, great. And then let's say maybe you've got 3 entity members within that entity and they've all filed their AGI. And let's say one of them makes on average more than $1 million. Well, so that individual is not eligible for payments. If he makes up 1/3 of the shares, the payments eligible for the project would be reduced by that 1/3. So they would only get paid the 66.666%.
Okay. So the 900,000 is a cap for each individual landowner.
For entities and individual heartbeats within. Correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Peggy, did you have a question?
This is Nelson Reininger, and with regards to the nonprofit status, the state of Colorado lists our ditch company as nonprofit. However, we found that we would have had to file with the IRS in order for to be recognized as a nonprofit 501, probably if a ditch company is a 501c12, I believe. And we opted not to go that route. And so we still had to fill out the forms, and I'm probably ahead of ourselves here, but the AD 2047 was a problem for us because a lot of people didn't want to fill out the information. Has nothing to do with the 900,000 piece. We know we're exempt from that as a ditch company, but they don't recognize us as nonprofit status as the state of Colorado does. We have to go through the hoops, pay the fees to become an official nonprofit if we opted to do that. How does that play into all this? As far as the, is it a nonprofit and a, let's see, looking at a nonprofit and tax exempt, or is it and or? We don't file tax.
Again, sir, yeah, so it kind of goes back to what FSA designates, and it's typically looking at IRS records, right? Is how they're helping to determine what you are. So it depends on how the IRS potentially sees you. And I'd strongly encourage you to kind of reach out to your local office. It sounds like you have. If you think that there were errors or concerns, reach out to me and we can work with the Farm Service Agency folks at their state office and just guarantee that they've made the correct determination.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're gonna jump on to the next slide. I'm not seeing any questions pop through. Okay, and so we're gonna shift over to the right-hand side of the flow chart that we were looking at earlier, where we're starting to talk about land eligibility. So Sarah, next slide, please. Okay, and there's two big questions here. Okay, so that water management entity has to have effective control of the land that they're trying to enroll. This is often determined on a case-by-case basis. We can accept such things as like even just landowner consent, like a written consent from landowners that you're going to be crossing on the physical way. I know that folks have submitted sorry, the word has just escaped my brain. Recorded easements that document effective control. If this is something that we do work through on an individual application by application basis based on the documentation available, and occasionally, depending what documentation is provided, we do have to seek legal counsel with our Office of Government.
Okay, Liz, can you just maybe real quickly just explain how prescriptive easements fit into that?
Sure. So Phil, I'm going to actually ask folks, if you do feel like you have a prescriptive easement, those are the exact ones that we have to go through our Office of Government Counsel to discuss, right? And get our attorney's eyes on it to be able to make the determination if it's sufficient for control issues to be able to enroll.
How
So,
have you had some cases go through, and I mean, kind of how have they landed in terms of yes or no having effective control of the land?
in general, it is better to have written consent from landowners. It just is. It makes it much clearer. It makes it so that when you start a project, there aren't lawsuits filed. It makes it so that folks are on board. If you are clearly and consciously communicating that this project is moving through, that you have potentially greased those skids instead of the giant yellow cat showing up and starting to install things using a prescriptive easement. We have had numerous projects shut down because of lawsuits. And I will tell you that it is the participants' responsibility to demonstrate effective control.
So Liz, just to, I guess, some few generic examples. Just if I'm a ditch company and we're piping a section of ditch and we're looking at, well, which farm track do we use? What often do you see people do? if they're piping a section of ditch. And then also the other is like a diversion structure where many ditch companies, they don't own the land that diversion structure's on. How does that work?
Right, so if we can get some written consent from the landowner on where things are installed, that's great, right? When we don't need anything formal, we've taken notes on napkins with valid signatures documenting that they have approval consent, that's great, right? The farm tract thing, water management entities are neat because we don't necessarily have to have it tied to a farm or a tract, right? I mean, that's part of the beauty of the water management entity is we recognize that we may be going across maybe non-agricultural lands. There may not be farm service eligibility records for farm and tract on that, and that's okay. So you'll just need to, we'll work with the state office, work with your local office. We can seek waivers for that farm tract override. If it is non-agricultural land that we're potentially crossing, right, we don't even necessarily need to look for wetland and highly erodible land compliance. That's new, and that's a big dang deal, right? That's less forms that have to be filled out. However, if it is being installed adjacent to or on agricultural land for pretty much the whole way, we can potentially still seek that farm tract waiver, that it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to one person's farm service agency records, one person's farm service agency tract. It can be tied kind of to this larger area in a whole. We still would need to seek a waiver, but if that is the case, we would still need highly erodible land and wetland compliance to be able to move forward with that project.
So does that
Okay.
mean for if you're crossing multiple pieces of property, that would qualify, as agricultural land, that each one of them would have to have a HEL review?
I'm gonna, Stacy, Kendra, do you guys want to step in on that one? Or we can find out the answer. My initial gut reaction is the people that it's benefiting would need the wetland compliance and the HEL.
That's what I was gonna say, Liz, but I do want to look into that one, just to make sure that's 100% correct, unless Stacy knows for sure.
I don't. And you will hear us not know these exact things because the water management entity part of EQIP is a fairly new end. And there are so many different things that go into it. So please just know that we can look for the answers and we can get an answer from national headquarters, but everything is just so case by case basis really with water management entities.
So we'll look into that one, Liz, whether it's just the land benefit or everything. So we'll get back on that one. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kendra.
Sonia, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, I've got two. So Liz, I just want to make sure I heard correctly. So you're saying that in cases where there is a prescriptive easement, you have seen lawsuits, and unless you have that landowner permission in writing, it makes it difficult to carry out your EQIP project?
Correct. So we were asked what would be the preferred method, right? And the preferred method is for us to have landowner consent, just outright written landowner consent. Even if there's a prescriptive easement, it is nice to just have everybody communicating and on the same page. We will take, if you guys do have prescriptive easements, we will take that information and we'll take it to our attorneys and have it reviewed and see if it is something that is sufficient for us to move forward to document that effective control of land.
Okay.
But again, that's where we get if a lawsuit is filed and they are calling for an injunction and installation, that's where the trouble comes in, right? And so that's where we try to be extra communicative and working towards collaboration from the get-go on these projects to prevent those later hangups and snags that nobody wants to see.
Yeah, no, so good idea to do it up front. Yeah, I just, the majority of ditch rights and water rights are by prescriptive easements in Colorado. So I know that that's the majority, and so was just curious. But so you wouldn't necessarily say no to the project, but at the same time, you would want the applicant to work towards getting some kind of an agreement in place. My second question is related to the state of Colorado's development of Regulation 87 for dredge and fill. Now, has the NRCS been tracking that information? And because now, it worries me a little bit, because now not only do you have the wetland stuff and working with the Corps, now there's going to be also probably a requirement to go through and get permits through the state of Colorado. Have you guys talked about all that, or are you following it or anticipate any problems?
We are, and I will say that our state conservation engineer has been working tightly with the Corps and is building those relationships. There are certain exemptions and that type of thing that we work through, but with the Army Corps of Engineers being another federal agency, we do try to communicate openly, clearly, and transparently on these type of projects and work with producers to address those concerns.
Now I'm thinking, right, you have to get a permit, from what I understand, for any piping or lining that you are doing with the Corps of Engineers, because they consider that a changing use. And it says when you're working on a jurisdictional ditch. But now I'm kind of worried that if you're not working, so now the definition, now the state is taking control of non-WOTUS waters. I'm wondering if we'll have to get a permit through the state as well to pipe or line through areas that weren't maybe considered maybe a non-jurisdictional ditch or a jurisdictional wetland. Now you have to just go get one.
Why don't we, Sonia, we can set up a meeting with our state conservation engineer or maybe the area engineer and kind of talk through if you've got a specific project that you want to kind of discuss through that kind of has that NRCS kind of tie to it.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so it's been incredible conversation. I am going to ask Sarah, can you skip through a couple of slides? Just so you guys will have them. Oh, shoot. No, we need this one. Okay. So in hopes of you guys will have all this information, I'm just going to hit on it very briefly because I want us to go down and focus on a table that kind of compares individual EQIP with water management entities to better help form this whole conversation. But real quick, we did have national headquarters has made the determination that since we are still awaiting a new farm bill, the last farm bill was 2018, we are waiting for a new one to start moving through the system. For this year, fiscal year 2025, NRCS has removed payment limitations to individual people. Okay, so if you have potential members that have hit those payment limitations within the 18 farm bill, they may potentially be eligible to still compete in fiscal year 2025 and receive funding. However, NRCS has not lifted the contract limitations under EQIP. Okay, so in a typical water management entity situation, a water management entity can be eligible for a contract limit of up to $900,000. Okay. They can submit a request in working with NRCS to potentially waive this limit, this $900,000 limit, and be eligible for 1.8 million if we are meeting several different requirements. And I'm not going to dive into those individual requirements. They're listed here in the slides. You'll just want to be working very closely with your NRCS office to help document and collect this information to make sure that we're meeting. Okay, and can potentially qualify for those. Okay, so next slide, please, Sarah. Just really quick, there are other funding opportunities that NRCS offers. Water management entities don't always fit the bill for the project that you're providing. So the State Conservationist does have the ability to determine that your project maybe should be considered in different funding pools under different programs, right? Like potentially the Regional Conservation Partnership Program may be a better fit, or Public Law 566 may also be a better fit, depending on what you guys are going to try to do. Once you submit that application and kind of ask for consideration in this program is really when NRCS is able to kind of take your entity's hand, take your individual's hand, and help you through the process and making sure that application that you're providing is getting tailored to the funding sources that we can provide. So just a quick note there that we may work with you guys to shift a water management entity application to a different funding source or look at other funding opportunities depending on that specific project. Okay, next slide, please, Sarah. And this is a slide that I was really, really hoping to get to, especially since we've got a lot of folks that may not even be super familiar with the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Okay, it's a comparison table between what water management entities opportunities can look like under the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, directly compared to if an individual applicant wanted to come in and apply for funding. Okay, so a couple of big things. I told you we were going to use that off-farm, on-farm lingo. When you're thinking about on-farm type projects, that's an individual producer, right? And I use the word individual, but it can be any one of those business types that are eligible that we talked about before, right? So individual producers or joint ventures or limited liability partnerships, joint corporations, everything on that FSA list, right? When we're talking about water management entities, those really need to focus on off-farm delivery systems that are going to ag producers, okay? Common practices for an individual application or any conservation practice kind of under the sun that aligns with their conservation project, typically water irrigation type systems, pivots, that type of thing, and the actual irrigation water management practices where we see a lot of the water savings. For a water management entity, we are specifically talking about usually that delivery infrastructure or like in-stream structures that improve wildlife habitat or collecting that water, that type of thing. Okay, so delivery type things, not necessarily tied to on-farm sprinklers, pivots, that type of thing. Okay. The eligible business type for water management entities is very limited. Those brief ones we discussed. And water management entities are required to demonstrate that they're serving that public purpose. Okay. If an individual came in and applied for an EQIP application, they're going to be held at a contract level to only receiving $450,000 in that contract, right? And they can't necessarily request a waiver to receive more than that. With water management entities, that base level is they're potentially eligible for up to $900,000 and would have to put in some work to document and request up to $1.8 million. Okay, if an individual applies for on-farm projects, they are required to meet HEL and wetland compliant, highly erodible land and wetland compliance requirements of the Farm Bill. If a water management entity is applying and they're implementing the project on non-ag land, they may not have to comply with highly erodible land and wetland compliance. However, if the project is going on in ag land, they will have to comply with highly erodible land and wetland compliance regulations. And so with that being said, that's kind of a big picture overview of just a slight difference between EQIP and the opportunities offered under water management entities. Dan, I see your hand.
Yes. Are these competitive? Are they getting ranked?
Yes,
Okay. What are some
yes.
ranking points, I guess, that one might be looking for?
Kendra and Stacy, can we send Phil the ranking for fiscal year 2025 WMEs so folks can see what they're actually being measured against?
Sure. Yeah, this is Kendra, and also on the Colorado NRCS website, you can access links to the rankings as well, and they are currently being uploaded as we speak. So if you could give us just a day, but for sure I will get that to Phil to post so that everybody has it immediately.
Okay.
Thank you, Kendra. Okay, so we do have some applications coming up, application deadline. Sarah, if you hit the next slide, and I know we're completely out of time. I just want you guys to know that it's in the slide deck if you wanted to take a look. We've got some very near approaching deadlines. Just as soon as possible. There's one coming up on Friday. Okay, so that includes irrigation. It may be a little bit short notice to get it in this year, but NRCS does accept those applications on a continuous basis, and especially these complex water management entities. It's better to get in the door, start getting things set up, help us to work through things with you. You saw that there's a lot of moving nuts and bolts and decisions that have to be applied to each application. So with that, I'm gonna move to our next slide, please, Sarah.
Let me just
I
ask
just-
Liz real quick on the deadlines. So
Yep.
what is the minimum amount that a water management entity or a producer for that matter needs to walk into the local NRCS office with to apply and to get in by that December 13th deadline?
Great question. We need a conservation programs application. So it's an NRCS CPA 1200. It's a form. If you can go to farmers.gov and request apply now, and you'll get that form. And that form just needs to be to your local field office. We can also accept it. It makes me a little bit nervous, but we can also accept applications via the phone. So if you do have an entity that wants to apply, you need to call your local office or email your local office. Say that you want to apply, that your intent is to apply before the deadline, and eventually you'll have to sign an application. We try to get that signed just as soon as possible because it makes sure that we've got the record of the request. But really, it'd be great to have that paper copy of the NRCS CPA 1200 in your local field office by close of business on the application deadline.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and we can send that out. Maybe Phil, is there any way, I know you said we're going to have some time to be able to look at notes and that type of thing that come out of this meeting. Can we distribute the NRCS 1200 to the listserv of registered participants this afternoon?
Yes, I think we can make that happen. And so just as if you want, you can take a screenshot of this. And just as a reminder, we have recorded this whole webinar and all the discussion. So it's going to be available. It'll take a little bit, but we'll get this posted. It'll be on YouTube, but we'll provide a link on our website. And then we will also have on our website posted the things mentioned. So like the slide deck, the eligibility matrix, specifics on the entity eligibility categories, and then this ranking criteria for 2025. We'll post all that, and then we'll see if we can get back yet today. If not today, then tomorrow on doing just an email to everybody that is on this call.
Well, Phil, I just wanted to chime in. Just a few quick things. I mean, I think we're going to definitely continue this conversation about this program. I know I've been involved in two ditches, one that has secured funding and one that we're applying right now, where we've actually used local and state funding to pay for the engineering. And as we've been trying to navigate that process, but there were some really good questions today, and it sounds like I think it would be helpful for us to think about these. I know the municipality question, where at least, I mean, I think in places along the Front Range, there's hundreds of ditches that have a municipal owner. And where you were able to say, Liz, well, okay, if the pipe to the discrete ag part makes sense and the pipe to the municipal part that's ineligible, it'd almost be helpful to come up with a list of what can we absolutely say is not eligible, because it's just between ditches that own water or cities that own water on a ditch and use it themselves or just lease it back and it's all ag use. There's some complex, and it's hundreds of ditches that are in this situation. And just the other point that was brought up with this differing definitions of what's a nonprofit, where I think a lot of people are used to being a 50C12 in the state, and then they don't need IRS records, but that's what the FSA wants. And that's a conversation I want to delve more into sometime.
For sure.
Dan, did you have a quick question?
Yeah, I had one more question. Are WMEs eligible for like a CAPS plan to do engineering that way?
I do believe we can talk about that for sure.
Okay.
So I hate to do this, but I do have to run. I do have a meeting at 1. So I apologize. I'm the one that went long, and now I'd be happy. I know that these are such complicated projects with so many things going out. If you have questions, if you just want to talk through spitball, give me a call, shoot me an email, talk to Kendra, talk to Stacy. We can help think through your projects. And of course, we're going to loop in your local service center. So they've got the facts. They can help build those records for you, right? Your most powerful advocate is going to be that local person that wants to see your project go through.
Well, to Liz, Stacy, Kendra, and Greg, thank you for the time today. This has been really helpful. I think it's raised a lot of questions, but it's been useful. It's clarified some things too, and we'll be sending out all this information and making it available. So I think that's going to help when people can just sit back and take a little time to absorb it, and then be able to contact their local offices or you guys for follow-up. So thank you again. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. And be looking for an email, a couple of emails from me. One that will come out probably yet today or tomorrow, and then I'll send out another one when the recording and the rest of the information is posted. Thank you.
Thank you.